morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're happy to be here to share this time with you. And our guest this morning is Paula Roscoe. And I'll read her bio in a little bit. And I wanted to greet Rami and Jessica this morning, my good friends.
Good morning.
And so I will read Paula's biography. Paula J. Roscoe is a grief guru and international award-winning author. She works with grief-stricken mothers using her unique 5-month program where she brings them back to life so they can become the authors of their own futures. I love that sentence. That's nice. Paula connects with the angels and spirit and uses all of her gifts as author, spiritual medium, holistic therapist, and grief specialist to heal their grief wounds completely, mind, body, and spirit, because all three are affected by grief. And Paula has also just been nominated for Author of the Year award with Women's Business Club. She offers on her website, with the link below, access to a free healing package and a discount on a course that she offers. And so that's her biography, and it's in the description below also. And Paula, I'd love to hear how you got into the work you do, how, as a grief guru, how you came to that title. And also, I know you're an author, and I looked at some of your books. Some of them are fictional books, right?
They are.
And which came first, right? The chicken or the egg, right? The author or the grief guru? And how do you work those together in your life?
Oh, that's a tough one. Everyone asked me that. Which came first? Okay. So 27 years ago, my son died suddenly.
Oh,
And I was offered nothing. And everyone I spoke to, nobody seemed to know how to deal with grief. Nobody wanted to talk about it. You know, the devastating D word was never mentioned. So I went on a kind of journey of self-discovery about how I was going to deal with this, how I was not going to fall apart. And one of the first things that came to mind was 2 weeks after his death, my husband, unfortunately, he had to go back to work. And I remember sitting in our kitchen, just holding a pencil, and suddenly I realized I was writing. And it was the writing that saved me. It was sort of, it got me off my backside to sort of say, okay, you know, that I can survive a day. I can come back to life. And as I was writing, I realized I was actually writing a story. And I'd been writing stories on and off for years as a child. And that story grew into a book. And it was the first book that I published, and it won 3 awards. So it's like, okay, so I've got something here. I can obviously do something. But so I carried on writing more historical novels and fairy books for children. But there was still something missing. There was a healing that hadn't happened. You know, the writing was beautiful. It was keeping me motivated. It was keeping me elevated. But it felt like there was something missing. And so I sat, and as I said, as you mentioned, I do work with angels. I work with them every day, and I've been able to see spirit since I was about 5-6 years old. And so I sort of asked one day, I said, look, what am I supposed to do here? I mean, I love the writing. I don't want to give that up, but what else am I supposed to be doing? And I was basically told, look, you know about death. You know about grief. You've dealt with it. You know, you're a survivor of abuse. You're a survivor of suicide. You've had a lot of trauma in your life, and you've survived. Why don't you teach women how to survive? Give them the power that you have to do it. You know, pass it on. So I said, okay. So I looked into some grief charities that were around during their. I worked with Mind for a while. I volunteered with Cruise Bereavement Care, and I realized I was actually very good at it. I was able to see what the clients weren't saying. I was able to read body language very well. And I was able to tap into what was going on behind the scenes with the guidance of my angels and things. So I went back to school, and I trained to be a teacher. I trained to be a person-centered counselor. That took 4 years. And then I made grief my speciality. So then I started to train people to become grief counselors over 6-7 years. And I try to encourage people to talk about death, talk about your funeral, talk about your will, talk about dying. You know, every single person on this planet is going to die. Where there's life, there's death. Where there's death, there's life. You have to kind of find some kind of peace with it. And I know that there are deaths that are awful. They're traumatizing. Especially if it's being done to you or someone has taken someone else's life. I know the trauma behind all of that. But there is still life to be had. There is still healing to be had. And what I try and teach people is that you are just as important as the person who died. And it's about realizing that so that you can come back to life. Because you're here, you know, if nothing else, the one thing that I have learned throughout the years talking to thousands of spirits is that they do not want you to be unhappy. It's the last thing they want. They keep reminding me, and the angels remind me all the time, is that love is the strongest energy. Don't give in to hate. Don't give in to anger. Don't allow it to fester. You know, by all means, feel it. But to feel it, you have to allow the healing to take place. You have to give yourself permission to heal. So what I then did over many years, it was, I don't know, about 2 years ago, I sort of said to the angels, okay, you know, I'm doing a lot of counseling work. I'm healing a lot of women, but I still feel like there's not enough. They're not getting enough. They're sort of getting to, yeah, I'm fine. I'm okay. And that wasn't good enough for me because I went beyond fine. I went beyond okay. I mean, I'm like, hell yeah, I'm living, you know, I'm embracing life. If I'm not enjoying it, I'm not doing it, you know. And people, you know, I know people struggle with that because they say, but you're a mum and your son died. Yes. And, you know, doesn't mean I don't love him, but I do love myself and I love my family enough to make the effort to come back to life. I have a daughter with, you know, special needs. I have to come back to life for her. Otherwise, what? She's not allowed to have a good life just because my son died. You know, you've got to find your worth, your value. So, so what I did was I asked the angels and I said, well, okay, you know, what else could I offer my clients? What else can I do for the world? And they said, Paula, you've got 20 plus years of stuff just sitting in cupboards, and you've got ways that can help women. You can create a whole program. I know, yeah. So I spent a few months going through what worked, what didn't. I went through more therapy on myself to make sure that it worked, that I felt elevated. I worked with clients. I started to incorporate things like drumming therapy. I'm a drumming therapist as well. So I started to incorporate drumming therapy, music therapy, photo, art therapy. But mostly it was around the writing, knowing that words have power and what you say dictates how you feel. How you feel is how you behave. So that's what I did. I incorporated all this therapy into this program, using the angels' guidance and using the angels' healing as well. And they pop in during the program to help the client. And I created this, and we were seeing miraculous results. You know, women who were so depressed, so grief-stricken, that they couldn't look up from their belly button. You know, they could barely crawl out of bed. Women who were in severe pain, because as we know, if you're in trauma, your body's holding all that pain. And they were leaving my workshop skipping and like, oh my God, you know, I started to incorporate sound healing and humming into our therapy sessions. And you know, as you may know, that once you start opening the throat chakra, you start speaking your truth, and whoa, all this stuff was coming out that they were just releasing it all. It was just such a beautiful thing to watch. So yes, I thought, right, okay, I'm going to start offering this to women, to the world, because this was just in face-to-face, you know, with women in my area where I am in North Wales. So last year, I found a coach who helped me because I'm not nerd, you know. I can type on a computer, but everything else was just no idea. And she's helped me sort of sort it out and put it out and offer it to the world, which I now do. That was me in a nutshell.
Awesome. No, I love, well, and you're an example for how all of us are supposed to be taking the things that we agreed to come into the world to struggle with
Mhm.
and see how the universe use them for our good, and use that as our passion and our unique way of um, supporting others in the universe, right? That's our gift to the universe, right? Uh,
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, I was talking to Archangel Michael years ago about what I'm supposed to be here, and he said, Paula, remember before you were born, you decided what you wanted to do. We can remember the contract, but you can't. So when we nudge you and when we put things in your place, and we sort of, which you may deem awful, and there were some awful things in my life. You know, it was a very traumatic upbringing. Up until I was 25, I was an absolute mess. I wasn't this calm, beautiful, healing goddess you're seeing today. I was an absolute wreck. You know, I was an abuse survivor. I survived attempted murder. I tried to take my life 7 times, but I kept coming back, and they kept saying, Paula, you're here for a reason. Can you stop doing that? You know, you know. And then of course when my son died, I thought, oh my God, you know, what else can go wrong in my life? What else? And the angels kept saying to me, this isn't about wrong or right, Paula. This is about nudging you to create the woman you need to be this. You know, I now know this is what I was always meant to be. And I'm loving it. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Um, that's just beautiful. I guess I have two thoughts, just for you to respond to there, or any of you respond to. It's like, I was worked in the nursing home for several years, both as an aide and as a administrator, and at different times. And what's really beautiful about working in a nursing home is the perspective of death that you get, because you know that the residents that you come to love, that you care for every day, it's like, you know, they're there just temporarily, right? And so you have this repeated loss and grieving, but at the same time it becomes a normal part of your life, just like you were saying that life becomes the death becomes part of life, and that's what it is. And so I had come to see it that way and feel it that way until my dad died.
Sure.
And then it was different because it was so close, and there was a lot of family junk uh, av- around that issue. And it took me, being my usual self, I just pushed on, right? And made changes in my life, and did things like, and proceeded into what I thought was best and everything. And about, let's see, from 2013 to 2019, right? 6 years. Um, then, um, then I was when I really grieved. When I
Yeah.
stopped, I'd hit my emotional bottom, right? And I couldn't run from it anymore. And I had to face not just the grief of losing my dad, but the sadness I'd always felt in my life, um, that I came to then get into the ancestral work by accident, also, no coincidences, right?
Yeah.
And find that, you know, that that sadness I'd always felt was because my grandparents on both sides carried deep grief, for losing parents and children, right? And I had it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's beautiful to clear, right? And
Oh,
to
yeah.
have that connection with the the ancestors and the angels that help you.
Definitely, yes. I mean, I've done a lot of work with some people, and their ancestral grief and how it's passed down through the families, but it's also passed down through the words that you speak, through the actions that are passed down through families. My particular one was no one spoke about death. It was like this this darkness that was kept in a cupboard. And when I've spoken to other clients and other people, a huge amount of people over the years, they all felt the same thing. Nobody will speak about it. Nobody wants to acknowledge it. And yes, it's carried. And then that behavior is carried. So my parents obviously learned that behavior from theirs, and goes back and goes back and goes back, doesn't it? Where nobody spoke about it. Or if they could, in the case of my mum, if she could lie about it, she would. So we had a budgie, a blue budgie in our house. And as a child, I thought birds obviously lived forever, because it didn't die. It just seemed to continue. I mean, I'm talking years and years. It wasn't until I was around probably about 11, 12, I asked the question, well, how long do budgies live, Mum? She said, only a couple of years, if you're lucky. I said, but blueies lived for 10. Oh, no, it's a different bird. So every time they were dying, she was waiting until we'd go to school, and she'd go out to a pet shop and buy another one that looked exactly the same. because that was more convenient than telling us blueies died, and for allowing us to deal with the death of our first pet. Now, I know it was coming from love. I know it was coming from care, but in a way, it stopped us from learning and releasing and allowing that grief to happen. It stopped us sort of working on it and getting some kind of what's the word? Getting experience in death. So it wasn't until I was 12, when my grandfather died, that I really experienced death. And by then I had nothing to work on. I didn't know how I was supposed to behave, how I was supposed to feel, what was I supposed to say? So that's why I try and sort of teach parents to talk about death to their children, because that usually the first death that they're going to experience is a pet or a grandparent. And there's some brilliant books out there. There are some wonderful books out there. So yeah, my favorite is The Huge Bag of Worries by Virginia Ironside, I think it is, or Iron something. And it's just beautiful. And it's not just about grief, but you can use it for any kind of trauma for children. So yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah. Nice.
I have a question. Do you have any tips for working with people that don't have a spiritual practice or don't really subscribe to, maybe afterlife or before life or any of that, and for them and their children dealing with death or grief?
Yeah, absolutely. Now my husband's an atheist. I mean, he's seen loads of stuff happening, but he's an atheist, and he believes that when we die, that's it, we're done. And I've worked with a number of people who have said the same thing. That's it, we die, we go into the ground, and that's it. And they teach their children the same thing. So with that in mind, you're still dealing with the death. So you just take all the spiritual thing out of it. You just deal with the death. You deal with what you've got in front of you. So you deal with the feelings. You deal with the thoughts, the behaviors, the actions. It doesn't matter what you believe in the end, because the angels they're not religious. They honestly couldn't care less what you believe. They come from love and guidance. They're really not religious. Yeah. I didn't work with them for a long, long time, because I'm not a Christian. I'm a pagan. I'm not I said, I'm the wrong person to work with. I don't believe in your God and all that. And they said, no, honestly, we couldn't care less what you believe. You can believe in a hippo with a tutu. We're not that bothered. It comes from love and guidance and support. And the main thing that they say to me all the time is when I'm working with somebody is love is the strongest energy. It doesn't matter what you believe. Just always come back to the love. It's the strongest energy. And when I'm working with a person who is an atheist or an agnostic or, or a different religion, we always work with the love. We always work with the gentleness, the kindness. And what's happening with you? What is happening with your thoughts? What's happening with your behavior? Where did those inner beliefs come from? Where did those old thoughts, where's your grief wound come from? And we start there. Because when you're working with a client, this is what I found through counseling, was that a lot of counselors, they come from where they are now and they try and heal them from there, which might get them to, yeah, okay, fine. You can't start from there. You have to start from all the way back, because that's where the beliefs started, the stories started, the thoughts started, the inner beliefs, the learned behavior. And it's that dictates how they behave now. Regardless of religion, regardless of belief, that is where it all starts. So you have to deal with that before you deal with this. So I had a client once, and I think he can honestly say he's one of the, I don't know, even I had to learn. So this old guy, he was in his late 60s, came to me, and he didn't want to be there. And he was an atheist. He believed that once you die, that's it. And he was very adamant about that. And he came in all very angry and upset. And he said, I don't want to talk about love, and I don't want to talk about healing. And I said, okay, that's fine. And then eventually when I finally got him to talk, he confessed to me that he had held on to his grief for 52 years because he refused to believe that there was anything after death. He didn't want to think about it. He didn't want to contemplate it. So he held on to it, and he was such an angry man and a bitter man because of it. And when we worked together over just one session, he came back, he left, and then I thought, I'm not going to see him again. But he did. He came back the next week, and he sat there and he cried and cried and cried the whole hour, more or less. And then when he got up and he stood up and he turned to me and he said, thank you. And I said, I'm not going to see you again, am I? He goes, no. But that's all he wanted. That's it. That was all he needed. That release, and someone to give him permission to release it. That there was no agenda, there was no religion, there was nothing. It was just about what he needed to do. So I hope that answers your question. Sorry, I kind of ramble on a bit.
No, that was beautiful. Thank you.
Great.
You.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's hard, even in my practice with gut health and health coaching in general. I come from, again, not a specific religion, but just very spiritual. And so I do feel like that's something I need to work on is being able to acknowledge everyone where they're at. So I appreciate those thoughts. Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that, sometimes some people I work with, and they don't want to discuss the angels. They don't want to have the angel card readings, and that's absolutely fine. I will give them just another session on one-to-one. I create the program with a lot of movement for change, and to make it unique to them, because it's very important. You have to meet them where they are, and whatever's going on in their world. I mean, I've also worked with women who are extremely religious, and full on going to church, believing the whole thing, and really taking everything on board. And that is a real shock for me, because I was brought up a Catholic when I was until I was about 15, and then I kind of rebelled. So for me, I had to do a lot of work on myself about staying in where they are so that I didn't bring what I was feeling, what I was believing into their world, because that's not what it's about. It was about their world and meeting them and loving them and accepting them and supporting them in exactly what they needed and where they needed it. And when it comes down to it, do you know what? Religion, belief, it has nothing to do with it. It really is about your grief, your trauma, and finding that love within it. You know, that when you come down to the basics, that really is it. Yeah.
I think, at least in my family, but I'm sure that it's not just grief that isn't talked about, right? It's not just death that's not talked about. It's so many things. And I look back and I think, why didn't I tell my son, this and this? Why didn't I explain why I did something? Why didn't I explain how I was feeling, or, whatever person, um, that you can think of, any plethora of situations in my life. It's like, well, why didn't I just explain? Why didn't I just talk about it, right? Whatever it was. But it's like no one knows how to talk about feelings very well in general, or even it doesn't even have to be well, like you said, it boils down to feelings. So yeah, I don't know. It's the patterns, I guess, that were formed generations ago, right?
And that's it. You know, this is learned behavior. And if we don't break free from it at some point, then yeah, sadly we will pass that on, and then we hope that they will break free from it. But for me, it was I had a long conversation with someone not that long ago, actually, around families and how we pass on certain behaviors and this, that, and the other, and how people say things like blood is thicker than water and family is everything and stuff like that. And I had to disagree. I had to sort of take a different, because I'm adopted, and although I'm very close to some of my family, I didn't feel like they were my family. The friends that I have gained over the years, they are my family. I'm closer to them than my actual family, so I could cut the ties of that very easily. I could cut the ties of like some of the behaviors that I saw in my mother and father. There was no way that I was going to do those with my daughter, so I was able to cut it. But I see it time and time again where people will say, oh, well, my mum does that, or my dad does that, or, we don't talk about our feelings because it's not done in the family, or it's not, we don't behave that way because the family, and people will mention family all the time. And it's a sadness that somewhere along the lines, there has to be an awakening to other, to opening up the world of communication between families. As you say there, you didn't want to talk to him about feelings and things like that, and explain things to him. I think there's this inner thing within us mothers. Sometimes we judge, and we try and perceive how they're going to be accepted or not. And we make that inner judgment before we even really, and these are like the inner stories that we do all the time, isn't it? So like there's certain things that, I may want to talk to my daughter about, but I've made an inner judgment to think, oh, she's not going to accept that. I won't do it. And then a few years or a few months down the line, I'll think, oh, I should have told her that. She could have dealt with that better. But it's the inner stories. It's always the inner stories that we listen to.
Yeah.
And we should voice, I'm all for, as you can probably tell. I like to speak. I like to voice. I like to talk things through. I like to get it out in the open. You know, I can't abide all this sulking and just speak your truths. Say what you need to say, and then we can deal with it. But if it's kept inside, there's not much I can do about that.
Right.
You know, so
Right.
that is one of the things that, you know, one of the main things that I've always taught my daughter, even though she has special needs. You know, it's always been a case of, Megan, you stand in your truth, you stand in your power, and if you can't, you tell your mum, and I'm going to bloody well pull you up to it, and I'll stand there with you, you know, until you feel okay. So, I mean, she's very verbal. My daughter, she can talk. And she goes out there and she lives life, and she embraces life, and she goes and does things that she wants to try and do and learn. But sadly, I've come across mothers and fathers, and there's no judgment here, this is just their own learning, is that they haven't done that for their children with special needs, so that when they become adults, they're not doing anything. They're not standing in their truth. They're barely speaking, you know, and to me, that's a real sadness, you know, but it's their journey, and I have to get that. I have to, you know, accept that. Yeah.
I had heard it at some point, I don't remember where, that that a lot of those old stories, I guess, are related to our fathers not pushing's not the right word, but encouraging, you know, direct encouragement for us to be all we can be.
Right.
I don't know if you've noticed any specific, whether it was more on father's side or mother's side for different things that you deal with grief.
For grief, well, at the moment, I'm working more with mothers. I do work with men, but at the moment, yeah, I seem to be working more with mothers, and I am hearing a lot of the same kind of, more or less the same stories around this detachment, that men are moving. They're moving away, and women are feeling very isolated within their grief, and there's no communication. You know, it's very much, and marriages are falling to pieces, and people are getting divorced left, right, and centre. You know, from what I've been hearing over the last year, sadly, that men are not talking to their women, and women have decided, well, if you're not going to talk to me, I'm going to talk to you, and hence this gap,
Pushes
this
it
bridge
away.
gap, you know. Whereas I think in the older generation, there was a lot more women looking after women, you know, within the community, within villages. You know, women would be the ones who'd look after each other, and the men would sort of look after each other. And I think there was more communication. You know, if you go back as far as, say, the Victorians, I mean, they knew how to deal with death. They made it an art form, the Victorians. I did a workshop on Victorians compared to the present day, and no one was scared to talk about death, because death was such a huge part of their life. You know, women were more or less in black all the time because their children were dying one after the other because of bad, you know, sanitation and stuff. People respected death. They had a really deep respect for it. And the community would all look after each other. The community would know when the death was, and they'd all look after the family. Nowadays, nobody's talking to each other. So there's no communication. Nobody is coming together and looking after the person who is grieving. So the women that I'm talking to, you know, they're feeling very isolated. They're feeling very lonely. You know, they're feeling very misunderstood. And they want to bridge this gap with their husbands or partners, but the men seem to have, kind of really disengaged from it all over the, for whatever reason, whatever's going on for them. So so I am seeing that kind of change over the last probably about 2 years or so. And it's, there's a lot of marriages breaking up because of grief, because people won't talk about it. There's no connection. There's no comfort. There's no looking after, which is, it's a terrible thing.
Well, and it's not that the men aren't grieving, right? They're because
No.
they would, if they're married, they would have had a lot of the same grief, right? And so it's a matter of, instead of sharing, they're withdrawing, right? As part
Yeah,
of that
absolutely.
emotional reaction.
That there is a lack of communication, a lack of honest communication, I should put in. It's one of the first things that I try and teach people is there has to be honest communication with a family. So you've got a mother and father whose child has died, and the mother is coming from this energy and the father's coming from this energy. And if you're not having this honest communication, you stay there. In fact, you start to move outward, because energy, if you're not on the same page, energy repels different energy. Whereas if you start to have honest conversations, you can start to come inward. Energy attracts like energy, and you can come together instead of repelling each other. So it's one of the first things I teach is always have honest conversations. And I actually did a workshop on this not that long ago about how to use words, how to use the right conversations, how to use the right kind of way to sort of bridge that gap between you and your husband, because your husband is grieving, as you say. He's lost his child. His child has died, but he is having to come at it from a whole new, different way. And a woman got in touch with me a few weeks ago and said, "Paula, you saved my marriage. We were not talking. We had not talked since our child died. And we were going through the divorce. And you saved our marriage. We are now back together. We are talking to each other. And we're using these writing exercises. If we can't verbalize it, we are using the writing exercises you showed us to sort of bridge that gap." I'm like, so that's good. That's a lovely thing to hear.
Yeah.
But the sadness is also that the women, of course, you're so all consumed within your own grief. Something that someone told me once is that grief is like flu, proper flu. I mean, not like, your man flu where they just lie there and pretend to be ill, sorry, men. But, but like proper flu where if you put money at the end of the bed, you couldn't even reach it because you can't get out of bed, And grief is like that. When you are deep in your grief, it's really, really difficult to try and look after everybody else. It's difficult to even consider anybody else because you're all consumed. You're grief-stricken. You're heartbroken. So if you don't have those honest conversations, and the longer it goes on, then the gap widens and it gets harder and harder to bridge that gap. So, I really do try and urge people to keep talking. Even if you just want to say one word every day to tell your husband, your partner, your children how you're feeling that day. And let them tell you how they're feeling that day. So you're all on the same page. You all know how everyone's feeling. I had a family a few years ago, and the woman, she would just get up. Am I allowed to swear?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So she'd get up, she'd go, "I'm having a really shitty day." And the husband would go, "I'm having a really fucking shitty day." And then the kids, one was 12 and one was around 4, 5. And they go, "Yeah, Mom and Dad, we're having a really bad day too." So everyone knew they were having a really bad day. And then another day, the mum would come up and go, "I'm not feeling too bad today." And they would all share just one sentence or one word, how they were feeling. And it kept them together. It kept them from drifting apart, it kept that honesty. And then eventually they were able to go to family therapy. And they were able to get on with their lives and heal, which was beautiful.
Yeah.
You know, that's what we want. We want people to heal, because when you're healed, it ripples outwards. When you're happy, when you're feeling great and you're energized and you've got high vibe going, it ripples outwards. And it's the same with grief. It's the same when you're feeling low and sad, people can feel it, you know? So if I can get people up here, then yeah.
Now, is that part of what some of your fiction works are for, to help get them up here, or is that kind of totally separate? It's just like your therapy, or your inspiration.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it started out as my therapy, as I said, and I've written, I don't know how many books now, about 10, 12, no, 13, I think. But only 10 are out in print at the moment. We're just dealing with all the book covers for the next 3. And there are historical supernatural fiction for adults and fairy books for children. So the historical supernatural fiction, I realized that I could heal women with my words. So all the characters, the main characters, are strong, powerful women who are put in various situations. I mix fact with fiction. I love my history, so I put them in historical things. And I was getting women contacting me saying, I could understand what she was going through. I could understand what she was thinking. I really, I loved her, and I could really sort of go with her, and I could associate myself with another character. And I thought, yeah, okay, so that was kind of done must have been on like a subconscious level, but it wasn't until I was hearing from my readers that, yeah, I could really associate with that woman. The stuff that she was dealing with and how she dealt with it, that's given me an idea to deal with my trauma and stuff like that. So that was great. The fairy books that I write for children, I wrote them for my daughter when she was about 3 or 4 years old. She's now 26. And what I used to do, I used to give the stories to the school to read to the young children. And all the stories have morals about how to live in nature, how to love each other, how to spread kindness, how to spread love, how to look after somebody else. And so that was another way for me to try and teach children at an early age that this is what life is about. Loving it, enjoying it, being kind, being gentle. Love is the strongest emotion. And also things like I deal with bullying, because my daughter was bullied terribly in school because she was special needs. So I deal with that so that children can have an idea of how to deal with it. So that was coming at it from that. I've actually just finished, and it's just being edited now, and it's due out in October, my first non-fiction book that I've written called Survive Grief and Come Back to Life, the memoir of a survivor. And that book is in 3 parts. And the first part is lots of grief information and how I perceive it and my sort of take on it. And it gives you some ideas of what to do and how to look after yourself. The second part is actually, I'm sharing 12 writing exercises that I use with clients. Just 12, not all of them. I'm sort of giving people a snippet, so a little self-help section. And then the last bit is the memoir of my life, of how I've survived, all that I've survived. And I'm still here. I'm still going. So, yeah, so that's due out in October.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, I was asked to do that by a group called, it's called 100 Voices of Women. And it's a worldwide project. So they've asked 100 women across the world to share their stories, whether that's in fiction form or whether that's in non-fiction, whether that's in poetry, however that we wanted to do it. But they wanted women who have dealt with trauma, and we're now sharing, our gifts to the world, if you like. So I was really honored to be asked. Yeah.
Nice. Well, and I think, of course, all of us have small traumas in our life, things that are upsetting or struggles to deal with. But I think almost everybody, too, has the great big traumas, like especially well, more and more for men, but especially for women, right? Rape or sexual trauma, right? And like I said, more and more often it's young boys encountering that too, right? And it's as well as death. Um, do you think the process of grieving death is the same process of grieving the pain of what you lose when you have the trauma?
I think that's an individual person, really. I don't think you can sort of generalize that, really. It's, you know, I've met women who have been abused, have been raped, and they grieve what they lost. They've grieved their childhood. They've grieved the trauma, the years that they couldn't accept the trauma, all those years that they put the barriers up, the defenses up, all those years that they allowed anger and frustration and the guilt, the shame, you know, to overtake their life, and all those years that they've lost. So that in itself is a certain type of grief.
Mm-hmm.
And also, you know, it is like a little death. It's almost like saying goodbye to that death so that you can be reborn, so that you can be who you want to be, that nobody has any power over you. You're not giving that power back to the person who abused you. You know, so in myself, I mean, I was sexually abused from a very early age, and I was in abusive relationships up until I was 21 when he tried to kill me because he caught me trying to escape. And then at 25, when I tried to commit suicide for the sixth time, the actual medical person sexually abused me in the back of the ambulance because he thought I was going to die anyway. So who was going to say anything? And I had to deal with all that. I had to deal with that trauma of men. It took me a long time to try and trust men again. But then I had to go through that grief of allowing myself to grieve that all men are not like that. I mean, I have a beautiful husband. We've been married 32 years. You know, he was my soul. We've been together in other lifetimes as well. So it was great that we found each other. But he saved me, you know, and but he had to watch me going through all this grief and trauma that I had to go through to get to the other side, to get to where I am now. And people will say to me, Paula, would you change anything? Would you change, if you could, if you had a magic wand, would you make that go away? And I always say no. No. Because those first 25 years were what created me. I'm a 53-year-old woman now who is strong, powerful, courage, happy, sexy, you know. I'm funny. I'm all of these things that I wouldn't be if I didn't have all of that, which I know is an odd thing to say sometimes, but, you know, in a way, I'm not grateful for them, but I made my peace with them, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I accept them. And as we said at the very beginning, sometimes you need little nudges to get you back onto the path of where you're supposed to be. And if those were little nudges, then so be it. You know, I survived them so that I can be me now.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. I think I've been saying beautiful a lot, but it is. I mean, the story, there's so many parts of your story and your work that, you know, the result is beautiful, right? The result of loving yourself and loving yourself enough to grieve, right? Enough to speak your
Absolutely.
truth, enough to fully express what you're called to do.
And that's it. You know, we come straight back to it. Love is the strongest emotion. It's the strongest energy you have. You can't hate somebody and love at the same time. You just can't. There's no room. So when you encompass love, and when I allow the love, I mean, the love I feel from the angels and the spirit when I'm working with them is just a very good reminder. I feel very blessed to have that and to be able to pass that on to my clients. Definitely. You know, and it was something that I was talking to someone not that long ago about the fact, you know, about the death of my son. But if Jack hadn't have died, I wouldn't have had Megan, you know, because there was so many things wrong with Jack that the chances are that he wouldn't have lived very long anyway. And the trauma of that, there was a very good chance that I wouldn't have had another child. So I have to kind of look at it in that way, in respect of Jack, bless his heart, he lived for as long as he could so that I could then find the courage and the strength through writing to then have Megan and be Megan's mother and give Megan all she needs, you know? So, yeah, so I feel blessed that I had Jack and so that I could have Megan. He gave me the strength and the courage to keep going because, as I said, I was trying to take my life so often. And then when he died, people kept saying to me, you're not going to be here when we get back, are you? You know, they actually thought that I was going to finish it. And I said, you know what? Not a chance. If a little tiny baby can have the courage and the strength and the power to stay alive for as long as he could, who the hell am I to give up on life? No way. He really did. He showed me. He was an absolute angel. He blessed me with that gift so that I would stay alive long enough to be Megan's mum. That's what I took from his death. And I'm grateful for it. Definitely.
Awesome. Wow. I was reminded of, I had a friend and she was talking about how she had a stillborn baby. It had been alive and, you know, she was within maybe 2 weeks or a month of delivery. And all of a sudden it had, she didn't feel anything. She had died. It had died, the boy. And so she told me the story of how she had to go to the hospital and actually they put her through giving birth and it was like, I had no idea that's how it happened. And I was just, it was traumatized for me. I mean, feeling it for her of being a mom myself and going through the not just the physical pain, but the, you know, the worry also of involved in labor and delivery and the uncontrolled aspects and everything, knowing that you're the whole time that your child wasn't alive. And I just expressed that great sympathy for, no, sympathy's not, you know, empathy for her.
Sure.
And it was like she looked at me and she said that she told me, you're the first person that's ever got the pain that I went through. No one else has ever realized or felt, known how the depth of that trauma would be in giving not just the death, but the other aspect too of it, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it was like, oh, it just broke my heart that women have to go through that. It's like not just knowing it's dead, but it's like a second death almost, isn't it? I mean,
it is. Yeah. I mean, I was 37 and a half weeks pregnant and we'd had no problems. Nothing was showing up on the scans. And then one day there was no heartbeat.
Yeah.
And they said, Paula, you've got to give birth to him. And I couldn't believe it. I sat stunned. You know, I don't know what in my grief-stricken head. I just thought maybe he was just going to dissolve or disappear. I don't know. And when they told me that, they said, Paula, we're going to have to break your water and you've got to give birth to him. That was possibly the worst trauma I could possibly imagine at that moment. I mean, it was awful. I was still in shock that my son had died. and then to be told, right, you're now going to, that's it, you've got to go through the birth, was horrendous, absolutely horrendous. Yeah, so I feel for your friend. I really do. It's not a pleasant thing to do. And we were given about 10 minutes to hold him, and then he was taken away, and we never saw him. That was it. But it wasn't so much that. I mean, that was bad enough. But what happened 3 years later was worse. It was worse. I don't know if I have time to talk about that.
Sure.
Okay, so when Jack died, we talked about cremation, and they gave us some ashes after we'd had this service for him. And I can remember looking at the bag and saying to my husband, "That's not our son." You know, I'm a spiritual medium. I know the energy. That's not our son.
Yeah.
And no one had believed me. They all thought I was in trauma, and obviously, well, I was. But then, of course, you know, I got pregnant with Megan, and life took over. And by the time Megan was 3, I remember sitting watching TV, and this news thing came on about how a hospital here, you've probably heard of Alder Hey Hospital in Liverpool. It had been found that they had kept parts of babies and bodies and things like that without the parents' knowledge. And as soon as I saw that, I knew. I just knew it. So I got in touch with our hospital. You know, in those days, it was before computers. You had to write letters. And I got in touch with them and I said, "Look, I want you to tell me, have you got our son?" And they denied it at first for a long, long time. And then eventually, about 6 months or so later, because there was a lot more parents getting in touch and demanding to know. And they got in touch and said, "Yes, we do. We have your son." Or what was left of him anyway. They had experimented on him for 3 years. So there was nothing left really. So what they had actually given us was someone else's leftovers. Yeah. So that then we had to deal with the trauma of burying what was left of our son, which was basically slides. There was no body. It was just slides. And we had to bury him because the chemicals that they had used to preserve what was left, they would blow up in a crematorium. So, and that I think was probably worse than the death, because we had to go through it all again.
Yeah. Well, and what makes people think they have the right to decide what happens to your child, right? Even after death. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, they treated him just like an experiment, you know, because of what he had. He had Pato syndrome, which I'd never heard of before that, but it's known as the extra chromosome, or chromosome 13. And basically, he had a few extra digits. He had a huge hole in his heart. His lungs weren't formed properly. I think he only had sort of partial kidneys and things. So for him to live to 37 and a half weeks was against all odds. So we saw him as a miracle baby for having lived that long. But the hospital and the scientists, they saw him as an experiment to find out why he had survived that long. They didn't see him as a human being at all. So, but there were 100 parents whose babies they had kept. So we all had to fight to get our children back. And we wrote a book. We actually all wrote a book called Sunbeams and Rainbows. And we wrote in it all the words that we wished we'd said to our babies. And we all just had a copy. It was just our personal thing that we all did. And we created a memorial in a local cemetery for our babies as well. So, yeah. You know, some good came out of it. You know, parents got together. They realized they weren't alone. They were able to express their grief. So, yeah, it was, you know, it was horrible. It was a horror story, but it brought a lot of love and togetherness for some people. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, like everything in our lives, right? The universe brings everything for our good. It's just whether we choose to allow it to work for good, right? Or to see the work is good. Paula, thank you so much. It's been very thoughtful and heartfelt conversation. And would you like to take time to explain more of your course or or the offerings on your website and how people can get hold of you?
Well, you can get hold of me on my website, www.pjroscoe.co.uk, which I think you're putting somewhere anyway. And through that link, you can get your free healing package, which is a set of positive affirmation cards that I created with the angels' guidance. They're photos of flowers that I took on walks in nature around North Wales, and the angels guided the words that I'm putting on them. And there's also a beautiful meditation there to help you remind you of the beautiful, loving support that you've got that you possibly don't even realize you have. And on there is also, right now during August, it's half price. I am giving this 3-day online course that releases anger, stress, tension, everything negative that you no longer need. It releases it. And once you release it, the next day you allow love and forgiveness and joy into your heart space. And then on the third day, you let go of all those words, all those beautiful words, all those words you've ever wanted to say and you never expressed. So it's an hour a day, but I ask you to do it over 3 days because you have time then to process all the feelings, all the thoughts in between doing each one. But the clients, they do this with me on my program in the 5-month program. And they've had huge results. I mean, women who have let go of 17 years of anger, they've done it in 1 hour. And they've slept for 10 hours afterwards, and they've gone back to me and said, I feel so much lighter because you're not constricted any longer. And people have told me about the stress that they've released from their shoulders, and they're not having headaches anymore. And so if you're feeling that, if you're feeling drawn to it and you're dealing with that, then by all means access it now while you can over August. Or pay full price after August, whichever. I just thought, I wanted to give people a little summer gift, so.
Nice. Yeah. And so is all your work one-on-one? You have the set processes that you go through, or do you offer it? Are some of them a group session also?
No, I work one-to-one. I'm high ticket and I'm high touch. So I only take on a very small number of women at a time, and I work through the 5-month program. Or some women, they feel that the first 10 weeks is enough for them, and that's fine because the first 10 weeks is very intense therapy. It's weekly therapy with me, and we do lots and lots of different variations of things to get down to the nitty-gritty of who you really are, what's happening with your grief. As I said at the beginning, we go all the way back. We deal with all the old trauma, all the old beliefs, all that, so that when you get to here, you're nice and clear, you're lighter, you're happier, you're ready to elevate your energy. And we work with angels, and lots and lots goes on in the first 10 weeks. And then the second half, the next 12 weeks, it's a structured writing therapy course that I put together that really gets down to who you are, what you think, how you feel. Are you standing in your power? If not, why not? Let's explore that. What other people think of you, what you think other people think. And it really gets down to what's really going on with you. So that by the end of the 5 months, you're completely clear of the grief, the trauma, all the old beliefs. You've let them go. And you're standing in your own power, and you've become the author of your own future. And you've also got, because we do a lot of writing throughout the whole 5 months, you've got your own grief journey right there. And then if they want to, I help them then create their own ebook, which, they can use for themselves, or, sometimes it's nice to have a little paperback of your own grief journey on your bookshelf.
Right.
Yeah, so that's what I do.
Nice. Well, Paula, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing this time with us in conversation.
Thank you so
So
much for having me.
you bet, you bet. And thank you all for watching. We appreciate you doing so.
Thank
So
you.
we'll be back next week with another guest, and we'll end the podcast today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.